Hi, I'm Pip from Vaughan Central. We're the collective voice of the health and care third sector in Leeds, and I'm delighted to be able to present the findings of the state of the sector, a study which shows the breadth, diversity of the third sector in Leeds. I'm going to start by just giving a little bit of background, a bit of an overview of why the study was undertaken, who was involved and how it was done. And then I'll hand over to my colleague Francesca, who's going to take us through the key findings. And then at the end, we'll come back and talk about next steps. We often hear that Leeds has got a strong and active third sector, a term that incorporates voluntary, community, faith and social enterprise organisations of all different shapes and sizes. And sometimes this gets abbreviated to VCSE. These organisations make a significant contribution to people living in Leeds, their health and their well-being, as well as to the local economy, delivering a huge amount of valuable impact. Recent years, we've lacked a strong collective evidence base to understand the third sector in terms of what it looks like in Leeds, what it contributes to the city and to people across our diverse communities. This research provides detail on the composition of the sector, its size and sources of income, the people who work and volunteer in it, and all the positive impacts of their work across the diverse range of communities and beneficiaries. The research also explores and illustrates the added value and the wider benefits that third sector organisations have for us in Leeds. These are all benefits that are advocated for and valued by our health and care commissioners and organisations across Leeds, but they're not always as well understood as they should be. And we want this research to help change that. The research was funded through Leeds Harnessing Power of Communities, which is a programme to improve third sector voice, engagement and impact on the health and care sector. The Leeds Advisory Group for the Harnessing Power of Communities includes Voluntary Action Leeds, as well as colleagues from Health, Local Authority and West Yorkshire statutory bodies and Health Watch. They've steered this work with Nifty Sustainability, a not-for-profit social enterprise who do research in the city. And Nifty led the bulk of the research with vital contributions from Professor Jane South and some of her colleagues at Leeds Beckett University. In terms of how it was done, the research has brought together data and findings from a wide range of existing sources across the city. This aims to present a clearer picture of the third sector in Leeds that can be updated periodically so that we can support people within the sector as well as stakeholders and decision makers so that everyone can collaborate together to make the third sector organisations as strong and as good as they can be. There have been huge challenges in undertaking this work. Notably, we've had to make certain assumptions. For example, data is not always available. Sometimes it's incomplete. For example, some things are Leeds specific and others are not. Some information has been inconsistent across different sources. And of course, the biggest challenge of all has been the impact of COVID pandemic, changing the way that everybody's been working. I'll hand over to my colleague Francesca, who'll talk us through some of the key findings.
Thanks, Pip. So first we'll go through some of the headline findings. There's much more detail in the full report, of course. And the first thing we're going to cover is how many organisations there are. There are two main types of organisations that we're looking at. One type is categorised as informal, emerging or unconstituted. These organisations are often well connected in their communities, which increase opportunities for inclusion of diverse voices. The other type is the registered charities. Again, a number of these are often connected deeply into the communities, but these are formally registered charities. Our research estimates that there are 2,000 informal organisations and 1,533 registered organisations, which we've rounded up to 3,500. We can only report with confidence on the registered charities because of the information they'd have to provide annually to the Charity Commission. So this research can't include information on the staff, services and impacts of the 2,000 informal organisations. So next, we wanted to find out how many of these 1,533 registered charities actually contribute to health and care. So we're looking at those ones in more detail in this graph. As you'll see, just over 3/4 of organisations working in the third sector in Leeds have impacts that contribute to the wider determinants of health. That's 77% or 1,180. It's important that we consider the wider determinants of health. Why is that? Well, because the wider determinants of health are factors like housing, employment, green spaces, neighbourhoods and community networks. All of these are really important and affect our well-being. The King's Fund, for example, summarises research that shows that up to 75% of our well-being is affected by these wider determinants of health rather than by formal healthcare services. So that's why our research looks at the contribution of these 1,180 organisations rather than just the 170 registered third sector organisations that have purposes directly relating to physical and mental healthcare services. And so next we turn to how these organisations are funded and resourced, and that's been one of the most challenging aspects of the research. This has been very conservatively calculated. We've excluded some for the purpose of producing a more representative picture. So we felt that if we included registered charities like the Grammar School at Leeds, Yorkshire Cancer Research and Leeds Trinity University, we'd distort the picture. The other challenge was that our major grant and contract funders like Leeds City Council, the CCG, Community Foundation and the National Lottery all report on their funding to the third sector differently. So again, the calculation we're looking at here is very conservative. What you also find is that most of the grants are small and short term. Around 1/3 of our registered third sector organisations also generate additional income through fundraising and commercial activities, including wills, gifts, donations, and even space hire, sale of products and services. And those funds are typically used to pay for core functions. The funding for many small and grassroots third sector organisations is precarious, which leaves them vulnerable to shocks and uncertainty about their sustainability. And of course, COVID's impacted their ability to generate income, with lots of organisations having to adapt their services and often seeing much higher levels of demand in the past 18 months. What we also find is that looking at the number of organisations by size and income is really interesting. What you can see is that around 75% of the organisations across the whole sector are micro or small. But those account for just 5.6% of the sector by income. So not only do those micro and small organisations do a lot with very little resource, but this has also got implications for funders and commissioners to consider when thinking about how to support smaller organisations better if they want to engage them in grant making, contracts or commissioning. And as you can see, we've got just over 1,000 micro and small organisations compared to 12 major organisations, 62 large organisations and 297 medium ones. When we see how many people work in the third sector, it really brings home the size of the sector's workforce and the reach it has here in Leeds. We've got an estimated 9,650 workers and 8,600 trustee roles which are undertaken across the sector, as well as between 40 and 70,000 volunteers, all of whom bring skills, expertise and capacity across a really diverse range of roles. It's been challenging to calculate the number of volunteers, so this range is the best estimate we can based on existing research. We know also that the number of employees and volunteers across the sector has been impacted significantly by COVID. The important role of experts in the sector is critical. We have leaders of grassroots, small and large organisations who often have lived experience of discrimination or inequality and a deep understanding of the wider challenges and opportunities that communities across Leeds face. The same is true for many of our employees and their volunteers, as well as our leaders. Our workforce is often rooted in the communities they work with, and they have trust and relationships that make a real difference when working on health-related issues, especially when they're working with people with complex needs. As well as direct service delivery and frontline support, our workforce is invaluable as strategic decision makers in the wider health system. For example, that includes sitting on boards, acting as consultants, providing expert guidance, or providing strategic representation or advocacy for some of our least heard voices. They're integral to the city's ability to meet growing demand for support and services, particularly with limited resources. It's also important to understand the typical number of staff per organisation size. We've used typical or most frequent number of staff rather than the mean average. And what that means is that with the data available, we're able to see what the typical number is rather than distorting the picture by just looking at averages. With the data available, we haven't been able to calculate the number of full-time equivalents, so it's unclear how many of the paid employees are part-time and how many are full-time. As you can see, the picture looks very different for our large and major organisations compared to the micro, small and medium ones. Micro organisations tend to be staffed just by their trustees, and you can see how few employees even our small and medium organisations have. Remember that medium organisations have an income of between £100,000 and up to £1 million, and yet their staff sizes are relatively small. And we wanted to show you the key areas of work that our third sector organisations for health and care are involved in. I think in terms of their impact on health and well-being, those areas really speak for themselves. It's important that we look at improving population health as one of them. In Leeds, we have multiple inequalities which are known to have significant impacts on the health and well-being of people. And this is why improving population health is such an important area of work. It's also precisely the reason why the role of the third sector to provide ongoing long-term support to people with complex needs is so crucial. We thought it would also be useful to show this in terms of the Leeds population. So as you can see, the total population of Leeds is about 793,139. And of that number, there's an estimated 224,000 people, which is just over a quarter, 28%, who live in the most deprived 10% of areas. Of that 224,000, almost 80% are living in 7 of the local care partnerships. That's Hare Hills, Chapeltown, Middleton, Bermontoft and Richmond Hill, Beeston, Seacroft and Armley. And these are all geographic areas which are generally well served by third sector organisations that are rooted in local communities. If you'd like to see any of these findings in more details, it's also available in the report. And as you can see from this contents page, there's a lot of information within the report, but we've tried to make it as easy to get around as possible. You can also find out more about the methodology and data sources that we've used for this research, and the report contains extensive footnotes which cite the sources for all the figures and information that's used. There's also a suite of case studies that support this report. They show the variety of organisations and service users, the services that they deliver, and the way that they work with other community organisations and funders. For example, we've got Barker, which is classified as a large third sector organisation. It has place-based long-term service provision supporting people often with very complex needs. Another case study is looking at the Orion Partnership. This is a collaboration of 4 small organisations. The collaboration helps them provide a much richer range of services and interventions than any of them could do individually, which makes them more commissioning friendly. And we also include case studies from small organisations like Battle Scars, which shows the impact that small organisations set up by those with lived experience can have for peers, and also for influencing service design in ways that improve patient experience. So that gives you the headline findings of the State of the Sector report. You can access the full report and the individual components and case studies visiting the Forum Central website. We also wanted to mention how this fits into the wider system and to other research. So I'll hand back to Pip.
Thank you, Francesca. That was a great overview. As Francesca said, we also wanted to look at how this fits with the wider system, with other work and other research. So first, let's cover the research. We're really fortunate in Leeds that we are working with other partners to commission and conduct important pieces of research that together are the jigsaw pieces that give us a really clear understanding of what we have, what we might be at risk of losing, and how to support our third sector to thrive and be resilient at this time of such extraordinary challenge and change. We think some of you will find it helpful to use this report in conjunction with some of these other reports. So we just wanted to highlight the resilience survey that Voluntary Action Leeds have conducted. This covers important areas around workforce capacity, funding sustainability, digital and digital exclusion issues, which are significant both for organisations and for the people that they work with. And it was also able to help us start to track trends, as it's the third time that this survey's been done in the last 18 months. West Yorkshire and Harrogate Partnership, Harnessing Empowered Communities, has commissioned some research from the University of Durham. That's the structure, dynamics and impact of the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. This is really important for showing the wider picture. There's other really important pieces of work, like the work that Jane South did for Public Health England. This is research that summarises the best available evidence around the UK champion programmes, and it's very much focused on health improvement and reducing health inequalities. Some of the key findings from Jane South's research show that community champion approaches are highly relevant to reducing health inequalities and can be applied flexibly to meet local needs and build on community assets. There's a range of different ways of doing this, so we'd really recommend that you have a look at that report. And there are other reports too. Voluntary Action Leeds have done some great research into volunteering, and there's the West Yorkshire Funders Funding Ecology research that Leeds Community Foundation and the Lottery have recently commissioned. In terms of what's next, obviously the research tells us loads of things and also highlights some gaps in our knowledge and helps us think about what some of the next priorities might need to be in terms of joining the gaps. They give us a great overview that enable us to then carry on working with partners across the system. And one of our current priorities is around mapping assets and existing bits of information. So not another kind of mapping for the sake of it, but something that's just really pulling together what we know and make sure that the format in which we have that information is consistent as possible. It will enable us to feed into the Health and Wellbeing Board, into the place-based partnership and the integrated care partnership work, but also crucially local care partnerships and some of the work that's happening at neighbourhoods, because it will give us a much more granular view, not just of the size and scale of organisations, but of the actual delivery and what's happening on the ground so that people can access that information. Doing this together with city partners will ensure that third sector organisations are visible, valued and well connected, and that will be massively benefiting all of our diverse communities across Leeds. Thank you so much, and I hope this has been useful. Do get in touch for more information.